On this cold January morning, people are gathering in anticipation.
Obama becoming our president! Woohoo! Yay! Thank the Lord!
They've come from all over the world, and they're walking in the dark across a frozen river. They've come to hear one man speak.
The way he speaks is very articulate, it's very inspiring, and it's nice to have a president, which we feel probably not since maybe JFK spoke this way.
He's truly a transformational leader. He transcends difference when he speaks. He brings us together.
Yo, they said this day would never come.
Sun hasn't come up yet.
History will be marked by a speech, just as it was in ancient Greece, the Roman Republic, and Imperial Rome.
As I look ahead of me, there's the Lincoln Memorial, the Washington Monument and Capitol Hill, and you sense that this really was designed as an imperial city.
Washington is like a stage set, closed down, cordoned off, for one of the rituals of power in the most powerful nation on earth. This morning, the city feels like a glittering prize to be won by the power of words.
And to all those who have wondered if America's beacon still burns as bright, tonight we proved once more that the true strength of our nation comes not from the might of our arms or the scale of our wealth, but from the enduring power of our ideals, democracy, liberty, opportunity, and unyielding hope.
What Obama has done, he's done lots of amazing things, but he's restored oratory to one of the tools of 21st century politics. That's a remarkable thing.
This is the year when eloquence returned to political discourse in this country. This was the year in which his opponents tried to dismiss all that as just words, just rhetoric, just words. Words are what are the instruments that a president of the United States uses to govern the country and wins the support of the world.
Looking forward to the speech once again.
We are excited. We're
encouraged.
Good morning. We're wearing the Super Obama cape, as you see right now. Obama!
Hope can find its way back from the darkest of corners. And when we are told that we cannot bring about the change that we seek, we answer with one voice. Yes, we can.
Many politicians try by a speech to give people to have confidence in them. Obama gave people confidence in themselves. We can do it, he said. Not I can do it.
And it's an abiding lesson for all politicians. You know, we're not there to be talked down to. We are not stupid.
Then, after Obama speaks, it's the most powerful post-address coverage on TV.
It's been real ugly at the airport.
But some might ask, how is there room for oratory in the world of spin masters, sound bites, and the 24-hour news cycle?
2.7%. I decided to call the police, you know?
Our enemies are innovative and resourceful, and so are we. They never stop thinking about new ways to harm our country and our people, and neither do we.
For the last 8 years, there's been a president who, though he's been able to stage a colour-coordinated press call, has had trouble with words.
It sent the wrong message. We were trying to say something differently, but nevertheless it conveyed a different message. Obviously some of my rhetoric has been a mistake.
Do you think? Rhetoric is the art of using language as the means to persuade. Oratory is the public speaking part of that. And a great deal of our notion of how it should be done goes back to the Romans, and beyond them, the ancient Greeks. In a world without media, no newspapers or television, let alone blogs and YouTube, speaking in public was the essence of politics. And it is this art that Obama seems to have revived.
For me, it's all about the speeches, the rhythm, the construction of the sentences, certain rhetorical tropes that Barack Obama uses just scream Ciceronian.
Who was Cicero?
Well, Cicero was a man not from the senatorial class of Rome. So he wasn't from the traditional ruling class. Not having the background of family or of a great military career, rhetoric was the thing at his disposal to make his career. And his aim was to become consul, which was the highest political office in Rome, and he did it by the power of the spoken word.
Cicero is probably the single most quoted authority on the art of oratory. His career as advocate, consul, and writer generated so many words that his slave had to invent his own kind of shorthand to keep up with him. He argued that oratory matters because states are established and maintained through the leadership of eloquent men. And what has Obama learned from the Greeks and Romans in terms of oratory?
A lot of times these great models of antique speech-making aren't actually consciously referred to, but form part of an inheritance, a general inheritance in the bloodstream of American rhetoric.
Barack Obama, like most politicians, most rhetoricians down the years, uses devices that are a feature of classical oratory. And if you look at his acceptance speech at the Iowa caucuses, he begins with what we call a classic ascending tricolon abundans, with anaphora, which I think he goes something like, they said this day, they said this day would never come, they said this country was going to be too divided, they said we would never have the unity to do blah, 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 blah.
Anaphora, that's using the same phrase at the beginning of a sentence. I saw them do this, I saw them do that, I saw them do the other. Again, it creates a nice rhythm.
Not with so much work to be done, not with so many children to educate, and so many veterans to care for, not with an economy to fix.
Captatio bello volentiae that means a sort of appeal to the goodwill of his audience, often by undermining oneself, or a kind of self-conscious humbleness or humility.
I get it. I realize that I am not the likeliest candidate for this office. I don't fit the typical pedigree, and I haven't spent my career in the halls of Washington.
And it's not just the use of anaphora and ascending tricolon, he'll also use a classic ancient rhetorical device such as praeteritio.
That means talking about something by pretending that you're not going to talk about it. An example might be, he says, I'm not going to talk about the wealth of America or the size of her skyscrapers or the greatness of her army.
We gather to affirm the greatness of our nation. Not because of the height of our skyscrapers or the power of our military or the size of our economy.
Of course, in doing so, he's reminded us that America is immensely wealthy and has great skyscrapers and an enormous military history. The ideal orator is a great performer, like a great actor. You know, you hold the audience absolutely on the edge of their chairs. You make them laugh, you make them cry, you hold them in the palm of your hand, and that's part of it.
The art that went into oratory was the same that you would, if you're Laurence Olivier about to play Hamlet. You do a lot of rehearsing before you step out on stage. And they'd work out all their effects that they wanted to do and moves they wanted to make. And senators, they were drama critics, really. Well, you know, I thought Catiline was not at its best today, a little thin. Well, that's the Greek style. Oh, not the Greek style again.
Since the first settlers, America's had a love-hate affair with oratory. Proud of its plain-speaking preachers, this is Billy Sunday, who drew huge crowds in the 1920s. He was an ex-baseball player, which might explain the body language.
Way over an open license saloon in the United States of America.
But America is also suspicious of eloquence.
As long as I got a foot, I'll kick fools. As long as I got a fist, I'll punch it. And as long as I've got a tooth, I'll bite it.
Burt Lancaster's character, Elmer Gantry, is a phony evangelist. The power of words is the power of the con man.
So here is...
And the salesman.
I will send you one $10 supply of royal bee.
Do you think a man should have the same privilege as a sponge? Of course.
And then there's the lawyer, who can be a bit of both.
Wishes to be accorded the same privilege as a sponge. He wishes to think.
Unless it's Spencer Tracy, who's always on the side of the angels.
Barack Obama, of course, known for being cool as a cucumber, but there was a funny aside where, and he told CNN that his daughter Malia, as they were standing outside of the Lincoln Memorial, said, "The first African-American president, huh? This speech better be good."
One occasion where oratory is expected, demanded even, is Inauguration Day. It has produced some truly memorable speeches.
That the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
Dedicated to one of the most revered presidents, the Lincoln Memorial is a temple to oratory. Its walls are inscribed with the words of Lincoln's second inaugural address and the speech which has mattered more than any other in American history. His remarks at Gettysburg, which helped heal a nation after the carnage and catastrophe of the Civil War.
77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation, or any nation so conceived and so dedicated, can long endure.
That speech, which contains the best definition of democracy ever made, government of, by, and for the people. I think that speech helped raise Lincoln to the summit of our best presidents, maybe the very best.
That this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth.
Lincoln's words. It took him less than 2 minutes to make the speech, and yet these words have helped to shape and create a nation. And in fact, he wasn't even top of the bill. Someone else was making a speech which took 2 hours to deliver. And who remembers any of that?
Well, Lincoln is effective because he's brief. It's really a lawyer making a case for the Union. It's perfectly obvious that Gettysburg Address has been stolen from Pericles. Pericles' great speech to the dead of Athens. Remember, Gettysburg is a cemetery. And then he went on to say that, the whole earth is a tomb for brave men. They need no celebration.
You see people reading it and puzzling over it and absorbing this message. And it's a long time afterward, and they still stand back with the shock of the power of what he was trying to say. Look, most political rhetoric is soggy because most politicians are trying to avoid saying anything. What makes political rhetoric powerful is when you have something important to say.
Sometimes it takes years for that important thing to be heard. On the subject of the emancipation of all slaves, Lincoln left a great deal unsaid. And it was a Baptist minister from Atlanta, Georgia, called Martin Luther King, who delivered a speech reminding the world of how much remained to be done.
50 years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation.
Dr. King's speech in Washington,
This momentous decree came
August 28, 1963. The speech really was about the broken promise Mr. Lincoln, in your majestic shadows we stand. You promised Emancipation Proclamation. We got the proclamation, but we still don't have emancipation.
I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream.
King, I thought, was the best in my lifetime because he had a perfect voice and perfect diction, but he could both tell a story and make an argument at the same time, and then rise to some metaphorical, oratorical heights.
With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood.
Words paint pictures. Words stir our imagination. Words make us conceive and believe, then we achieve out of words. And oftentimes speakers gain their power from their pain, or power from their predicament. And they speak of it with pathos and passion, and it elevates people to resist and to fight back.
I am somebody. I may be poor.
Those who are down at the bottom of the hill have to speak loudly and clearly to get through.
But I am somebody. I may be hungry, but I am somebody.
Barack Obama has been part of your congregation here in Chicago. How much has that influenced him?
Yeah, I think that's a part of who he is. I think being a part of the African American church, I want to say almost by osmosis, he's picked up some of it, and it's grown in him and grown with him, and he has grown with it. You know, I would love to say that sitting around listening to some of us speak, that he picked up some of our finer points, but I think he's made them his own.
His speaking is absolutely suffused and characterized by the traditions of black utterance, the musicality of it. You know, they said this day would never come. They said our sights were set too high. There's that musicality. There's also the rhythm of it. His speeches have a rhythm, a sort of rise and a fall, which plays with your emotions. And that's absolutely about black preachers.
We will be equal with the angels. Angels don't marry because they do not die. Men and women marry because they die. And therefore they must multiply by procreation.
You see, the human soul is so large that the world cannot fill it.
The thing I thought was interesting about Billy Graham, because I grew up in the Baptist church, so I was always watching him on television, you know. He never spoke more than 20 minutes, and he used very simple language. It was a kind of welcoming, simple, straightforward way of speaking, which made a big impression on me.
Sermons are in the bloodstream of American culture. Some people actually enjoy them. Just ask the president.
Hi, Charlie.
How was church?
It was fine. Stop it.
It sucked.
You're talking about church.
Oh, like I'm not already going to hell. What was the problem?
He feels the homily lacked panache.
It did lack panache.
It was a perfectly lovely homily on Ephesians 5:21. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her.
Yeah, she's skipping over the part that says, wives, be subject to your husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church.
I do skip over that part.
Why?
Because it's stupid.
One of the real reasons, I think, for the continued interest in oratory in American culture is the continued importance of Christianity in that national life. Not just the preparedness to sit down and listen to a sermon, but the enjoyment of the sermon.
Words, when spoken out loud for the sake of performance, are music. They have rhythm and pitch and timbre and volume. These are the properties of music, and music has the ability to find us and move us and lift us up in ways that literal meaning can't. Do you see?
You are an oratorical snob.
Yes, I am, and God loves me for it.
I try to make it like a jazz music piece, where I've got a script, and there's this ad lib that comes in the moment, just feeling what's there. You know, a lot of communications has nothing to do with the words people say and the way they're processed in the human brain. A lot of it is just your body language or your tone of voice or the way you look in your eyes.
Communism gone, nuclear war receding.
People won't remember even 10% of the words that come out of your mouth exactly the way they come out. It's a miracle if people walk away from your speech with 4 or 5 points. So you have to think about that. I think you get better at it over time. It's like anything else, you know, the harder you work at something, the better you get at it. Now, I like a lot of the old Roman speeches. You know, I love reading Suetonius. In the 2nd century, wrote his History of the Caesars. So if you go back and read Suetonius, he's got big chunks of Cicero's speeches in the Senate. And my Lord, they said things about politicians then that are much rougher than we say today.
With 3 hours to go till the big speech, the crowds are staggering. No more than a few thousand ever heard Cicero speak. I literally just turned round and there were 1 million people behind me. Extraordinary. How on earth do you reach an audience of this many people? Well, first of all, you have to get them to shut up.
Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears!
The most famous oration in literature is in Shakespeare's Julius Caesar.
I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. The evil that men do lives after them. The good is oft interred with their bones. So let it be with Caesar. The noble Brutus hath told you Caesar was ambitious. If it was so, it was a grievous fault. And grievous
Mark Antony delivers a classic funeral oration.
Here and the leave of Brutus and the rest, for Brutus is an honorable man. So are they all honorable men.
But he's also persuading, playing the audience. The repeated praise for Brutus, his opponent, has the effect of undermining him.
But Brutus says he was ambitious, and Brutus is an honorable man.
Shakespeare, writing at the end of the 16th century, was alive to all the tricks of classical rhetoric.
The interesting thing about rhetoric is that it's part of the curriculum in the grammar school. And so everybody learnt the rules of rhetoric. I studied rhetoric as a Renaissance scholar and sort of listed endless rhetorical tricks in lists. Can't remember the names of any of them.
But Elizabeth I could.
I am your queen, and like my father, I mean to rule. There is one thing higher.
She was proud of her Ciceronian Latin.
It's religion.
We just don't know whether she struggled as much as Kate Blanchett.
I ask you to pass this act of uniformity.
We know that she wrote poetry. We know that she read Latin and Greek.
My people.
If you think of Mark Antony's famous speech in Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, where he sets up false propositions and knocks them down, she did the same thing in Parliament. Elizabeth understood public relations in terms of the media at her disposal. So if a lady at court wore a bigger dress than hers, she was sent home. If somebody wore more blazing diamonds than she did, had to take them off. And you can imagine what the diamonds looked like in the daylight. I mean, diamonds are the equivalent of having your own spotlight. And she also knows that she's up against other orators. And so when she speaks with tremendous emphasis.
I know I have the body of a weak and feeble woman.
Now she comes to it, now she cogs the dice.
The heart and stomach of a king, and a king of England too.
In addressing the troops before battle, Elizabeth was following a tradition that goes back to the Greeks and has produced some of the most stirring oratory ever written.
with our English dead. In peace, there's nothing so becomes a man as modest stillness and humility. But when the blast of war blows in our ears, then imitate the action of the tiger.
Are you going to do one of your Führer rallies, sir? What do you think I should say? I'm sure you'll think of something.
On the eve of the invasion of Iraq, Colonel Tim Collins made a speech which captured the imagination of the world.
My expectation, and as it turned out correctly, was that within 24 hours of saying that they would be dealing with other dead humans. They may even be killing other humans, and some of them may be losing their own lives. And what one has to ensure, first of all, is that they are not overcome by the shock of this. Some of these young people had never even seen their granny dead.
If you are ferocious in battle, remember to be magnanimous in victory. Iraq is steeped in history. It is the site of the Garden of Eden, of the Great Flood. It is the birthplace of Abraham. You tread lightly there.
How did you prepare your speech?
Well, in a funny way, I genuinely didn't. I think that somehow, given the right circumstances, given the situation, given the solemnity of the occasion, the words just come to you. Most British generals who are considered to be good orators are really like somebody out of central casting. They'll sort of say, oh, do remember to bring a clean hanky and use the loo before you cross the border. You never know, there'll be another chance, sort of thing. And for them, that's what good leadership sounds like. For us listening, we think, well, here we go again.
Every general, of course, has his own style. When he spoke to the Third Army on the eve of the Allied invasion of France, General Patton showed his lightness of touch.
I want you to remember that no bastard ever won war by dying for his country. He won it by making the other poor dumb bastard die for his country. And then, all this stuff you've heard about America not wanting to fight, wanting to stay out of the war, is a lot of horse dung. Americans traditionally love to fight. All real Americans love the sting of battle.
The hour of our greatest effort and action is approaching.
Cometh the hour, cometh the man. It could be argued that one of the reasons America even entered the Second World War was the tireless speech-making of Winston Churchill. If oratory thrives on adversity, there's been no more critical moment for this country than when his words went to war in 1940.
We shall go on to the end. We shall fight in France. We shall fight on the seas and oceans. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender.
My father really hated the idea of speaking without notes. He called it speaking on the unpinioned wing. And actually, I've heard him do it, and he did it very well, made sometimes brilliant speeches, but he didn't like it.
I come here on a tide of hope.
He put a great deal of time into preparing his speeches, walking up and down the library at Chartwell, dictating always to his secretary. And I think he sort of, as dictating them, he heard them. Do you see what I mean?
Against the triumphant might of Hitler
with the greedy Italian at his tail.
He had a good manner of address. I mean, he didn't hold his notes up close and sort of, you know, didn't feel that there they were, but he had them typed in a special way so that they looked rather like verse on a page, out of psalms. He called it psalm form, and his secretaries had to learn how to do it.
Ah, this is not the end. It is not even the beginning of the end. But it is perhaps the end of the beginning.
Churchill always said that he got his oratorical skills from Tammany Hall. There was an old boy there, Irish-American, who was a gifted Irish immigrant-style speaker. And Churchill, on the first trip to America, would go down and listen to this man. And he'd never heard anything like it. It was raw. And he could do anything, you know. He's great range. So every time you hear, you know, we're knocking the over this and that and so forth, you're hearing an old Irishman that Churchill had listened to as a young man.
He had this phenomenal memory. I mean, he could remember poetry and indeed prose that he'd learned when he was a schoolboy at Harrow. He had this phenomenon. It was like a most wonderful sort of larder of literature. And it was sacred, and it was profane, and it was patriotic. But it was thrilling when he was in a reciting vein. It was thrilling to be there, to hear it all roll out. And not by eastern windows only when daylight comes in the light. In front the sun climbs slow, how slowly. But westward look, the land is bright. I remember him doing that, and that absolutely gave me goose pimples down my back, and that was very moving and thrilling. That was when at a very difficult time in the war.
Not by eastern windows only, when daylight comes in the light.
Churchill's finest hour was as a war leader. It suited his style. He was less successful in Parliament, which has been home to a uniquely adversarial kind of political oratory for centuries, although some say it isn't what it used to be.
I noticed today in the papers and on the television they have now brought in a new person now to get people to vote Tories. I've noticed it now happens to be, and I saw on the website, Mr. Tosser. Now, I don't know which person this man was modelled on the front bench, but let me tell him, I always thought that party was full of them, and that's why they lost 3 elections.
No, it's not an Afra. It's not Tricolon. It's not even Praetoritio. It's John Prescott. Parliamentary debate, especially Prime Minister's questions, often seems to be more about point scoring and knockabout than serious argument. How much has it changed over the years?
Well, if we go back far enough, it was common to speak for hours with very few notes at all. William Pitt the Younger could deliver an entire budget lasting several hours, including dozens of separate measures, with actually very few notes in front of him, and having composed himself by walking around St. James's Park for maybe 20 minutes beforehand, and then enjoying a good dinner, and then going and delivering a detailed and wide-ranging budget lasting several hours.
Especially in the 19th century, it was very important that a politician be a great House of Commons figure. And there were real duels in the House of Commons where the effectiveness of an argument was crucial to the survival or fall of a government.
A very good parliamentary speaker could win not only the argument, but the vote by making a great speech. That's not usually the case today.
If I think back to parliamentary moments, I think the debate in 2003, when Blair made a very, very persuasive and powerful speech in favor of war against Iraq, I think he changed people's minds in that chamber with the force of his suasoria, with the force of his persuasion.
What will Saddam feel? Strengthened beyond measure.
What will the other states who tyrannize their people, the terrorists who threaten our existence, what will they take from that? That the will confronting them is decaying and feeble. Who will celebrate and who will weep if we take our troops back from the Gulf now?
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure that the whole House will join me in condemning totally this unprovoked aggression by the government of Argentina against British territory.
The voice is unmistakable, but Margaret Thatcher's career in oratory is a strange one.
Legality.
Well, Margaret certainly began making the impression of speaking stridently, and that didn't make it particularly attractive. But she very quickly took advice about that, and suddenly it was Cilla Black.
And so we had a series of mad voices
that were ridiculously husky or
plaintive or thoughtful.
She wasn't a naturally graceful speaker like an Obama. She wasn't. She didn't have the sort of eloquence and the sort of grit of a Churchill, but she conveyed exactly what she needed to convey, which was passionate belief in what needed to be done and the toughness of what she was doing.
To those waiting with bated breath for that favourite media catchphrase, the U-turn, I have only one thing to say. U-turn if you want to. The ladies not for turning.
Good evening. Sir Geoffrey Howe, Mrs Thatcher's longest-serving colleague throughout her years in power, turned on her in the Commons today and accused her of risking the nation's future.
Geoffrey Howe had resigned. He was going to make his resignation speech. We all went in for it. We were all saying, oh my God, another boring Geoffrey Howe speech. And for the first and last time in his life, Geoffrey Howe had the House riveted.
The point, Mr Speaker, was perhaps more sharply put by a British businessman trading in Brussels and elsewhere who wrote to me last week. People throughout Europe, he said, see our Prime Minister's finger wagging and hear her passionate no, 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 much more clearly than the content of the carefully worded formal texts.
Extraordinary. The most boring man in Parliament finished off the career of the Iron Lady.
It's rather like sending your opening batsman to the crease, only for them to find, the moment the first balls are bowled, that their bats have been broken before the game by the team captain.
Of course, even that clear metaphor wasn't always clearly understood. Not all that long ago, I was doing some shopping locally with a friend and happened to pass a chap, a postman, who was emptying a post box. And rather uncharacteristically, in a sort of Dennis-Healy way, I greeted him. And he looked up at my friend and said, "Who's that bloke, then? Is he the chap who attacked Margaret Thatcher with a cricket bat?"
If he wants to reply, in that case, Mr Blair, yes.
So he's allowing him to have a fourth question, or to reply to the Prime Minister's challenge.
I think we'll put... I think, Madam Speaker...
If you think this sounds like a rabble, you should have been here on April the 20th, 1653, when Cromwell addressed a few well-chosen words to the Rump Parliament.
It is high time for me to put an end to your sitting in this place, which you have dishonoured by your contempt of all virtue and defied by your practice of every vice. Ye are a factious crew and enemies to all good government. Ye are a pack of mercenary wretches, and would, like Esau, sell your country for a mess of pottage, and, like Judas, betray your God for a few pieces of money.
Cromwell didn't need to persuade. He was there to vent his anger at those he thought were preventing him from creating a godly society. And he had a group of armed musketeers with him too, which helps.
That is one of the great speeches. I mean, if you read it, it's the disgust for these politicians, for these wicked lazy, corrupt politicians.
Prostitutes.
These prostitutes, you know, the way, the disdain of this man of God, this brilliant soldier, this dictator, you know, Britain's only military dictator, the way he throws them out. The astonishing contempt in the speech. It is one of the greatest speeches.
Have you not defied this sacred place and turned the Lord's temple into a den of thieves by your immoral principles and wicked practices? Ye are grown intolerably odious to the whole nation. You were deputed here by the people to get grievances redressed. So, take away that shining bauble there and lock up the doors. In the name of God, go.
What do you think? I would have a pause before the last sentence.
In the name of God.
A telling pause. And then, what's the words before that? What's the sentence before that?
Take away that shining bauble there and lock up the doors. Then it's pause. In the name of God, go.
And lock up the doors. In the name of God, go. In your own way, of course.
Ladies and gentlemen, beautiful, intelligent, friends of all ages, races, and measurements, U.S. citizens, worldwide residents, whatever your religion is or sexual preference.
One of the reasons parliamentary oratory, indeed all oratory, might seem diminished and out of date is the media revolution which we've all lived through. Obama's campaign was utterly web-savvy and built from the ground up. The first great change was when speeches started being printed in newspapers, and people said then that oratory would never be the same. Then came radio.
There is a sense of real history. A brighter day will come. If we are conquered, all will be enslaved. And the United States will be left single-handed to guard the rights of men.
The radio is the great barrier of this. Radio suddenly meant speeches. Oratory reaches millions and millions and millions of people. So all oratory has to be looked at before and after radio.
Churchill's intimate connection with his audience through the new medium was not lost on the politicians, and by the early 60s, television had come to number 10.
Well, there you are. You can see what it's like. The camera's hot, probing eye, these monstrous machines and their attendants, a kind of 20th century torture chamber, that's what it is. But I must try and forget all this paraphernalia and imagine that you are sitting here in the room with me.
If television gave a new intimacy, its gaze could also be merciless, and details of presentation came to matter more than ever before.
Hit the 1-minute switch, please.
In 1960, the first televised debate between presidential candidates, John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon, set the pattern for the future.
In the election of 1860, Abraham Lincoln said the question was whether this nation could exist half slave or half free.
Now we're in a completely different phase, and have been in the last ever since the the Kennedy-Nixon debates, really.
But our disagreement is not about the goals for America, but only about the means to reach those goals.
When actually we see every facial expression, we see sweat, we see fear, we hear many different intonations, we can see into these people's eyes, and that again changes oratory completely. And now oratory is about seeing as well as hearing, and it's about millions of people seeing these things at one moment and seeing things that you can never take back.
The question before us is, which point of view and which party do we want to lead the United States?
Mr. Nixon, would you like to comment on that statement? I have no comment.
Television brought its own relentless rhythm. The length of a major party candidate's soundbite in 1968 was over 42 seconds. By 1988, it had shrunk to 9.8 seconds. Now, it's less than 5. 1 hour to go before Obama is due to deliver his inaugural address. What will he say, and how are these words arrived at? We know he has a team of speechwriters, including the 27-year-old Jon Favreau. But as to who writes what, that's a secret known only to a few, and none of them is telling. And then, unbelievably, Here it comes. The most keenly awaited words on the planet right now, spluttering out of a fax machine. If you want to know the detail, the intensity, the research and word-by-word analysis which goes into an important speech, then there's frankly no more authoritative source than the West Wing.
The enemies of humanity itself. We say here tonight with one voice, there is no corner of this earth so remote, no cave so dark, that you will not be found and brought to light and ended.
That's a number spike.
Hey, crank that up.
You broke 65 on all the lines.
Major speeches are analysed by pollsters and run past focus groups to find the key words which press the right buttons in the audience. But this is nothing to the work that goes into constructing them.
Memos are written. They come from everywhere. Every agency, department, senior advisor, outside notable.
What's an outside notable?
Former presidents. Henry Kissinger, Bill Gates, Jesse Jackson. Mr. Rogers wants to write us a memo. We'll read it. We'll pass some of them on to the president, and he'll start making notes in the margins. Then we have the president's first thoughts meeting. That's when we all want to kill ourselves.
Why?
Because that's when the president tells us we're nowhere.
Why?
Because we're nowhere. So we try to figure out what people want to hear. And that's when anybody who didn't want to kill themselves before has certainly been converted to the cult.
Why is it so hard?
Because it's a white piece of paper.
How high are the stakes?
High can count.
So what do you do?
Whatever it takes to get started. And we read new memos, and we try new themes, and we hear new slogans, and we test new lines, and after a few weeks of that, you still got a white piece of paper.
Being a political speechwriter is like writing for the movies. First, you're always part of a team. Second, you always have to remember, you're not writing what you would say. You are writing for a character, and you have to construct the character in your mind and understand him. And you have to say, in this situation, look, I might do this or that, but my character would do something else. So you have to write, what would the character say?
Franklin Roosevelt had a speechwriter by the name of Sam Rosamond who called it the grind and the glamour. And I would add to that the ratio of grind to glamour is probably 3 to 1.
Some of the more painful moments in my diaries relate to when we're writing the conference speech. It could be absolute agony. Tony seemed to need these kind of 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning, crisis of confidence, it's all terrible, it's all crap, let's start again.
We are back as the party of the majority in British politics, back to speak up for Britain, back as the People's Party.
What would usually happen is that I'd provide a first draft, which he'd look at in a really perfunctory way, and then he'd say, well, what it needs are these 3 things, 1, 2, 3. And at first I'd protest, no, but all 3 things are in there already, Prime Minister. It's already full of that stuff. I soon learned that I should say at that point, yes, Prime Minister, absolutely right, yeah, of course. I'll go away and put those 3 things in. And then I'd give him more or less the same draft 2 days later, and he'd say, that's much more like it. And then we proceed from there.
I mean, some of the scenes, if people had seen some of the scenes when we were writing late at night, when Tony would be sort of there with his hair all over the place and kind of just wearing a dressing gown, and literally, we had this sort of... We never used to throw old drafts away. They'd all be lying around on the floor. And you'd have sort of food being brought in and not cleared away because he didn't want the people to come and disturb him, to take the food away. So you had these trays piling up, and it's all a bit sordid, really.
The most terrifying moment in every process was about 15 minutes before the Prime Minister would go and deliver the speech. He'd say, have you got any jokes? As though jokes come entirely disembodied from the process of writing.
There's this sort of obsession with getting some funny lines in it. Where's the jokes? We haven't got any jokes. Monday night, we haven't got any jokes. There's nothing funny in here. And then there'd be this sort of scrabble around. And I can remember at one point we had Roy Hudd sent through some absolutely brilliant one-liners. I think 1 or 2 of which we used, and then some of which we saved for John Prescott on Friday.
And there was room for a joke or 2, like this one on the Channel Tunnel.
The French got the high-speed link, we got the slow coach link, but then we've got the Tories.
It's like stand-up. And every stand-up comedian knows that if you don't get your response, you die.
You've got to remember, a Labour Party conference, it's not just the person up there who's doing the speech that's a bit nervous. The audience is a bit nervous sometimes. A lot of those speeches came at really difficult moments.
Warmed by an affectionate welcome, Neil Kinnock today took the toughest road for any political leader, to chip away not just at his opponents, but at the prejudices of his own supporters.
They're words that I've been wanting to say for years, but I had to time it in the right place so that I was speaking directly to the labour movement and confronting them with this idiocy that was going on from the ultra-left.
I'll tell you what happens with impossible promises. You start with far-fetched resolutions. They are then pickled into a rigid dogma, a code. And you go through the years sticking to that, outdated, misplaced, irrelevant to the real needs, and you end in the grotesque chaos of a Labour council hiring taxis to scuttle round a city, handing out redundancy notices to its own workers.
I knew I had one bullet in the gun, and I hit the target.
Liverpool councillors were furious. Liar, shouted Derek Hatton. Eric Heffer, the veteran Liverpool MP, didn't want to hear anymore, and he stalked out of the hall.
Provoked and energised by his opponents in the audience, Kinnock's speech delivered a historic victory against the odds.
Inspiration has come from one above all, and that's an Iron Bevan.
So if Mr. Anthony Eden is sincere in what he is saying, and he may be, then if he is sincere in what he is saying, then he is too stupid to be a Prime Minister.
What was extraordinary about Bevan was that he wasn't just a great platform orator, whether it was the plinth in Trafalgar Square or the platform in Labour Party conference, but he was a magnificent parliamentary, conversational and declaratory speaker, second absolutely to none.
People say, it's necessary for us to defend the fund. That we must keep the fund on an actuarial basis. Now, comrades, that's a lot of nonsense. There ain't no fund.
Bevan was a famous crowd pleaser, but there are dangers in playing to the crowd, as Neil Kinnock discovered at the notorious Sheffield Rally of 1992.
Thank you. Thank you. Comrades. Well, all right. Well, all right. Well, all right. Well, all right. We better get some talking done here, serious talking.
That was Neil, completely drunk on vibing with the crowd. And what Obama shows us is you can relate to the crowd, you can absorb that energy, but you also have to have some discipline about how you do it. And the Sheffield Rally was an object lesson in throwing yourself into the mood of the moment, but not having any sort of little voice saying, yes, but what are we doing here? How's this going to look? That was unfortunate.
What happened was, in a period of a few seconds, I walked into the Sheffield Arena, there were 10,000 people there. I've likened it to a furnace opening. And I turned round and this blast of noise was continuing. In fact, it increased. And like a rock and roll singer, I said, well, all right. And the audience, to my surprise, shouted back, so I did it again. It didn't mean anything. Well, all right. It's what Johnny Cash does. It's what the Everly Brothers used to do. Would I do it again if I had my time again? No, I wouldn't, because I'd have thought about it.
That is a classic illustration of the socialist state, which draws nearer with every Labour government and which Conservatives have never reversed. It's all right for some of you. Half of you won't be here in 30 or 40 years' time.
Now that was a good joke.
It's all been downhill since then. I think to some extent you either do or do not have an innate enjoyment of having an audience. It's a bit like, it must be the same gene as enjoying being an actor.
At the end, William Hague, who wants to be an MP, was given a rapturous reception. Mrs. Thatcher later told him his speech had been thrilling.
Look at the dosh that William Hague earns for going to speak on the after-dinner circuit. People like to listen to a speech. They like a speech with a gag at the beginning, and then there's something serious, and then they like it to transport them off. People like to listen to a speech.
Throughout history, people have been deeply, deeply sceptical of people who can talk well, as well you might, viz. Hitler. My mother was dead, so it was just me, my sisters, and my dad just at the weekends, and there wasn't much to say to each other. So my dad used to throw this grenade into the centre of the boiled eggs at Friday tea time, you know. He'd say, hey, you know, tap on the egg. That fella Hitler, he had a point, you know, I mean, something like that. And of course, we'd explode and he'd just sit back and watch the fun.
In Hitler's case, the seductive power of oratory was enhanced and exploited by the dramatic staging of his rallies.
See, the thing is, there's already hysteria. It's not like it's more like a rock gig, this, you know.
Es spricht der Führer.
This probably, but he's trying to take control of the room here, I think. Look, he's looking at his nose to make sure he doesn't... He'll wait. He'll wait. Look, he's just feeling this thing. Look, calming himself and them. Heightened expectation. This is all practiced. Look. What's he going to say?
And he was very like a rock star, and he totally understood presentation like that. And there are those great photos of him practicing in front of the mirror, striking poses, which were incredibly camp and absurd. Yet the whole thing worked enormously well.
Als unsere Partei gerade 7 Mann hoch war, sprach sie schon 2 Grundsätze aus.
One of the things that I think Hitler's speech is most interesting about Hitler's style is his lack of inhibition. And lack of inhibition shows emotion, and emotion, uninhibited emotion, people believe in.
Zweitens, sie wollten daher kompromisslos die einzige Macht und alleinige Macht in Deutschland.
His very lack of inhibition convinced people of his sincerity, and that was, I think, that's the most powerful part of his oratory.
Immer und immer wieder predige ich, der Wiederaufstieg der deutschen Nation ist die Frage der Wiedergewinnung der inneren Kraft und Gesundheit des deutschen Volkes.
Great thing about words is that they lie, and people do find it very difficult to believe people don't mean what they say repeatedly and with sincerity. And of course, that was the great genius of Hitler's speeches. I mean, he continually talked about how he wanted peace. Even after the war had started, you know, his last appeal to reason speech in the Reichstag, for example. Reading it, funny enough, I've got a copy of it because they were dropped as leaflets on London, and my grandmother picked up a copy of it. And if you read that speech, it is incredibly convincing. I mean, reading it, you know, he just says again and again he wants peace, he wants to make peace with England, he doesn't want war. And that is a very powerful speech. And I imagine a lot of people in Germany believed that that was the case, that he didn't want war.
Ancient critics of rhetoric would have found Hitler a pretty good example of everything that they distrusted about rhetoric, and there are plenty of ancient critics of rhetoric. Socrates takes apart rhetoric and finds rhetoric not to be a skill or an art, but just a form of flattery, just something that flatters the masses and pulls them along.
Don't believe in oratory. No, nonsense. If you say something to me, I look in your eyes and I say, does he believe what he's saying? Does he know what he's talking about? Why is he saying it? Why is he saying it to me? Why is he saying it to me now? And the oratorical extremes which the spin doctors provide completely don't register with me at all.
So, in the red corner, Tony Benn with Socrates, and in the blue corner, Demosthenes, who said what matters is delivery, delivery, delivery. So where does that leave Obama?
I think Barack Obama is a good example here in that he is as close to proving Demosthenes right as anyone has. Because if you look at some of the writing taken as a lyric on the page, it's clunky. Now, if somebody in British politics said, yes, we can, and indeed they have, actually, it would not be thought of as a great rhetorical moment. It would be thought of as rather peculiar. But Obama said it, and because of the moment, and because of his beautiful singing delivery, we give him a dispensation from that criticism. It's a beautiful moment. It's a great rhetorical moment. It will be anthologized.
It was a creed written into the founding documents that declared the destiny of a nation. Yes, we can. It was whispered by slaves and abolitionists as they blazed the trail toward freedom. Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
If you had said this to me a year and a half ago, I'd have gone, spare me, Bob the Builder. You know, which is nonsense. It's an anodyne, ridiculous piece of crap.
Yes, we can. Yes, we can. Yes, we can. Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
And yet that nonsense, obviously he probably hadn't heard Bob the Builder, but transmitted through the mouth of Obama and the potential of his presidency takes on real meaning.
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
And so here's this guy who comes along who makes banal cliches, yes, we can, sing.
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
Obama is specifically a 21st century person. He's, you know, in the cliche, he's post-racial. He's also post-media. He's in web time now, which is, of course, a medium, but it is specifically personal.
Millions of us never saw him live, and never even saw media clips of his speeches. We went online, and it's very interesting when you go online, like that great speech he gave on race, which was quite a long speech, quite an abstract speech, but it got literally millions of hits.
I have already condemned, in unequivocal terms, the statements of Reverend Wright that have caused such controversy and in some cases pain.
And it's all there.
Yeah.
At length.
And it shows people are not just hungry for oratory, but they're hungry for ideas.
He's only gone back to a style that must have been perfected in the early amphitheatres or within the Senate grounds itself, because the web has made the world the amphitheatre.
What makes it like ancient Athens is this directness, this totally unmediated way of being able to speak to the populace. And that's very exciting.
After 8 years of a president who could barely manage the English language, the world is responding now to a president who's an intellectual, a university professor, a Harvard Law Review editor, a man who doesn't dumb down his speeches.
The 44th President of these United States, Barack Obama.
My fellow citizens, I stand here today humbled by the task before us, grateful for the trust you've bestowed, mindful of the sacrifices borne by our ancestors.
When the speech itself finally began, Obama seemed to temper the enthusiasm of the crowd, as if to say, there's difficult work to be done. Maybe he was mindful of the phrase that you campaign in poetry and govern in prose.
The question we ask today is not whether our government is too big or too small, but whether it works, whether it helps families find jobs at a decent wage, care they can afford, a retirement that is dignified. Where the answer is yes, we intend to move forward. Where the answer is no, programs will end.
It was a good speech. It had some very important substantive points, and that's a lot more important to me than soaring oratory.
If he'd given us fantastic flourishes of oratory, people would have said, well, look, this country's just a state, and he's just giving this oratory. What's he actually going to do? So he chose to give a very practical speech about, you know, getting down to business. This is the crisis. But there were still things in the speech to thrill the listener, things to thrill the black listener.
This is the meaning of our liberty and our creed, why men and women and children of every race and every faith can join in celebration across this magnificent mall, and why a man whose father less than 60 years ago might not have been served at a local restaurant can now stand before you to take a most sacred oath.
You know, almost no matter how powerful you are, you measure the impact of your words not on their beauty or the emotion of the moment, but on whether you change the way not only people think, but the way they feel, and then they can then change the way they are. And it's extremely difficult to do, but important to try.
We are a nation of Christians and Muslims, Jews and Hindus, and non-believers. We are shaped by every language and culture, drawn from every end of this earth. And because we have tasted the bitter swill of civil war and segregation and emerged from that dark chapter stronger and more united, we cannot help but believe that the old hatreds shall someday pass, that the lines of tribes shall soon dissolve, that as the world grows smaller, our common humanity shall reveal itself, and that America must play its role in ushering in a new era of peace. Thank you. God bless you. And God bless the United States of America.
I experienced the most profound speech that encouraged me, that gave me, made me feel as if I wanted to just go on and do bigger and better things.